Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And we have another pre-recorded show for you this week. Actually, we have two. So I'm going to explain that. I did 2 one-hour face-to-face interviews at the UFO Congress. And I was going to run them as 1 2-hour show. And then I said, what the heck? On YouTube, the same person that may want to watch one may not want to watch the other. So we split them in 2. And so this guest on this show is Bill Birnes. You may know him from the UFO Hunters. Great guy, highly intelligent, funny, and all that. And he's going to be talking about Edison versus Tesla. And I try to engage with him as best I know about Tesla. It's a great show. I hope you sit back and enjoy it. And anyone can support the show, even right here on YouTube. All you have to do is go to podcastufo.com, and for $2 or more a month, you can help us out. And there's a link down in the text below. Thanks so much. Sit back and enjoy the show. Bill Birnes, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Marty.
And you know, you were the episode 2, and I have a lot of affinity for anyone that took a chance to be on my show near the beginning, because I was a nobody. I still am, but I mean, I was more of a nobody. Just someone asking you on, and you came on. And
look, here's the deal. Anybody who wants to talk about UFOs or alternative history or anomalous theories or things that nobody else wants to talk about, I'm all in favor of that, because quite frankly, you turn the news on television and all you get is this blather of this is the party line, whether it's red, blue, red, green, whatever. It's the party line, and we're going to pump this information into you. And somebody who has the courage and the backbone to go on the air and say, look, I don't care what you think. I'm going to talk to people whose views aren't in the public domain, whose views aren't out there, and they may have crazy views, and nobody says you have to agree with them, but you know what? It's there. You want to listen to it? Here it is. So I said, hey, Marty, if that's what you're going to do, then I'm with you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome. So today I'd like to talk about, I know you wrote about Tesla versus Edison or something along those lines. What was the title of that book?
The book was Edison versus Tesla, the battle over their last invention. And it's funny that you bring that up, because that's exactly what we're talking about when it comes to history that nobody deals with, because it's been buried. What they were battling over, those two geniuses, and here's the funny part about it. Both inventors, both engineers, both electronics engineers, brilliant men, both of them were bitter rivals. They hated each other. And I can tell you why, but they hated each other. They both were awarded the Nobel Prize in physics, to share the Nobel Prize. They hated each other so much, neither one of them wanted the Nobel Prize because they didn't want the other guy to share it.
Oh my God. Yeah. No, I have followed a little bit of that. Tesla really is really fascinating to me. I know Edison, again, is a genius. Tesla more so because, you know, I never really heard about Tesla during my lifetime until I would say the last 15, maybe 20 years.
There's a reason for that. History has a way of burying what's inconvenient and pumping up what's convenient. I mean, for example, I'll just give you a quick example, not to sound too academic. When I say to you, King Richard III, what do you think about? What do you imagine?
He's crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
Richard III was a wonderful king. Okay? Yes, they may have had a hunchback. They found his grave, and they found his body. And he did have a hunchback. But still, and yes, he was Machiavellian. But the fact was, Richard III was not that bad a king. I mean, he was not an evil tyrant. He was not as he was portrayed to be by Basil Rathbone. He was not that person. I mean, yes, he was defeated at the Battle of Monmouth by Henry Tudor. But still, the fact is, history, the Hollinshead Chronicles, and I can go into that, but I'm not going to do it. The Hollinshead Chronicles portrayed him in a certain way. Why? because the Hollinshead Chronicles, that's how Shakespeare based his history plays, the Hollinshead Chronicles were written under the auspice of Queen Elizabeth. Now, for Queen Elizabeth to have done the honest truth about Richard III, whom her grandfather killed, would have been to denigrate her own line to the throne, because it was really Queen Mary who was the rightful queen, not Queen Elizabeth. So the point that I'm trying to make is history determines what floats to the surface, what children are going to read in their school books, what teachers are going to teach. Edison became the genius who invented the 20th century and the 21st century. Even though it's Tesla, we are sitting in a room with electric lights.
Yeah.
Because of Nikola Tesla.
Alternating current.
Yes.
Yeah. Which he scratched out in sand with a stick or something like that. I remember reading something about that.
Tesla realized that, and this is standard, if you're walking on level ground, it takes one level of energy. If you're walking uphill, you have to expend more energy to walk up the hill. That's the secret of alternating current. So what Tesla said was, if instead of just having one electric motor, one dynamo, one core spinning through a magnetized coil, generating power one way, that's direct current, that only travels for about a mile.
Right.
And then it has to be boosted by a relay. But what would happen if you were able to swing that coil from a positive pole to a negative pole? That swinging back and forth, that creating all that potential, in electricity it's called potential, it's power. If you did that, that would push the current along much faster. So it's actually less expensive, much less overhead, to have current alternating between positive, driven by positive and negative, than just have one direct current. And so that was Tesla's theory. Tesla had a kind of an ideographic memory. He was able to conceive of something in his mind and then translate what was in his mind onto a piece of paper, onto sand, onto anything. Mm-hmm. That's how he created his inventions. And so Tesla, when he was a young engineer, he was in Paris, and he was a young engineer, he had this vision of this kind of dynamo device that would swing current back and forth between positive and negative, and then drive it further with greater potential, with greater power. And he said, if I can only get this to the master, Thomas Edison, he'll see the beauty of this, and immediately he will license my invention, and we'll both be millionaires. Well, Edison, besides being a great inventor, and besides being a genius in his own right, and a real entrepreneur, he was also an entrepreneur. And over the years, he became a corporate entrepreneur. And as a corporate entrepreneur, his investment was in direct current. So yes, he had a power station on Pearl Street in New York City. And every mile or half mile or so, he had a relay station to boost the power. Well, he had invested so much money, and his stockholders in General Electric had invested so much money, that for him to completely redo his own power grid would have been an enormous expense. So he rejected Tesla out of hand.
Right, right. You talked, when we first started talking, you mentioned the phrase alternate history. Let's say Tesla was never born. How long do you think it would take for alternate energy to be discovered by someone? What happened if it didn't and we had like power stations every half mile?
We would have power stations every mile.
Yeah.
I mean, once you have a corporate structure in place, and this, of course, is also part of the issue in the book I wrote about how Edison, at a certain point in his life, and this goes back to the whole point of alternative history, how Edison, at a certain point in his life, became corporatized. He was not the young Tom Edison at his telegraph machine, the young Tom Edison, stopping the railroad train from colliding with another. This is a very different Thomas Edison. He was a Thomas Edison who was friends with Harvey Firestone, friends with Henry Ford. This was a Thomas Edison who was vested in his own inventions.
Right.
So that would never, possibly, it never would have changed.
Wouldn't that be horrible? I mean, it would be just so cost ineffective. I mean,
exactly.
It just wouldn't work.
Yeah, but as a society, that is exactly what we would have grokked, and that's how we would be living today.
Wouldn't that be something? I mean, we'd just be held back so far.
Exactly.
Who knows what else wouldn't have come along if it wasn't for Tesla? How many patents did he have? It was 100 something, or
literally thousands of patents.
Was it that many?
It's true. And Tesla's patents, some of them were so wild. For example, great alternative history. As Tesla, let me just grab one thing.
Sure. So we're on with Bill Birnes. And he had to get a sip of water.
I had to get a sip of water. So here's the deal. So Tesla, after he financially broke up, because he was working for Edison,
Right.
He was working
Started out.
Yes.
Yeah.
So after they broke up, Tesla came up with an idea for radio-controlled vessels, radio-controlled boats, for example.
Amazing.
Radio-controlled torpedoes. This is before World War I.
Right.
So Tesla takes his plans for the radio-controlled torpedo to the Naval War Board, because they're the ones buying inventions. Tesla spent his life really scrabbling for a buck. I mean, he was a millionaire and then lost it all, but that's how he spent his life, angling for a buck. Just like all the rest of us trying to sell our stuff. So he goes to the Naval War Board, and he presents the idea for automated soldiers, robots, automated radio-guided torpedoes. Now, there was a problem with them, which we can get to in a second, but automated ships, automated vessels. We have those today. Mm-hmm. Who's sitting on the Naval War Board as an advisor, consultant? Thomas Edison. He deep sixes everything.
Oh, no.
Now, the problem with Edison's radio-guided weapon, with Tesla's radio-guided weapons, is very basic. I mean, do you remember the old CB radios?
Yes.
Okay. So you're
Breaker
on the
19. Yep.
Yeah, Breaker 19. So you're on the CB radios, Breaker 99. You're on the CB radios, and somebody, somewhere, keys a mic. And what happens?
It goes blank, or it
static.
Takes static, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
That's the problem with the radio-controlled torpedo. Sure, you can have a radio-controlled torpedo, but you've got a German U-boat sitting somewhere in the Atlantic, and that German torpedo, all they've got to do is find the right frequency of the radio-controlled torpedo, basically jam it on the same frequency, and it gets lost. Along comes a composer named George Antheil, and along comes a movie star named Hedy Lamarr, the beautiful bombshell, Hedy Lamarr. And together, they say, boy, there's a problem with radio-controlled devices. Because if you block the frequency, then you're just going to get static. So here's what they do. They invent something called spread spectrum technology. In other words, and this is the basis for things like pretty good programs and crypto emails. If you have a code at one end, on the transmission end, and a receiver has the same code on the other end, then you can encrypt that transmission, and a third party trying to break it will never be able to interfere with it, can't jam it. So Hedy Lamarr and George Antheil invent a protocol where the frequencies switch And so the transmitting frequency and the receiving frequency are sharing that protocol for how the frequency will switch. That's called spread spectrum technology. And just let me show you what device uses that today.
The phone. Yeah. Yep.
Spread spectrum technology invented by the movie star Hedy Lamarr.
She was like a genius in her own right.
Absolute genius. But now let's go back to the 1930s and 1940s. She's an absolute genius. She's a beautiful movie star. And so nobody takes her seriously as an inventor.
What a shame.
It's Hedy Lamarr, the movie star.
Yeah.
Hedy Lamarr. So that invention, even though she patented that invention, she and George patented that invention, never bought by the Navy.
But didn't they use it eventually?
Yes.
Yeah.
And here's what happened. Sylvania repatents what Hedy Lamarr invented. And that invention was never used, wasn't used in World War II, was never used until it's 1962. And a Soviet submarine is sitting off the coast of Cuba. And an American submarine is also sitting off the coast of Cuba. And that Soviet submarine, this is during the blockade, during the JFK blockade of Cuba, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, that Soviet submarine is a guided missile submarine. And she opens her missile ports, and she is set to go. And the American submarine, with Hedy Lamarr's invention of the spread spectrum technology radio-controlled torpedo, is sitting a short space away, waiting to fire that missile. 2 subs, silent, deep, and only one person prevents the Soviet submarine from launching a guided missile. That is a Soviet weapons officer who says to his captain, I am not going to be the person to launch a nuclear war that will destroy the planet. And the Soviet sub never launches her missiles. The American sub never fires her Hedy Lamarr invented radio-controlled torpedo, and the Cuban Missile Crisis ends. That's how close we came. Not hours, not minutes, but seconds. And while all that's happening, and I spoke to a pilot about this who was there, while all that's happening, a fleet of interceptors, a squadron of interceptors from Edwards Air Force Base in California, takes off with nuclear-tipped anti-air-to-air missiles, missiles, anti-aircraft missiles, yes, but they're air-to-air. It takes off from Edwards Air Force Base, flying nuclear weapons over the northwestern United States, out over the Bering Straits to the fail-safe points right before the Soviet territory begins over the Bering Straits, and goes into this great circle waiting for the Soviet bombers to come. And that pilot told me that if those Soviet bombers had come, even though we had nuclear-tipped air-to-air missiles, some would have gotten through. And San Francisco, Seattle, Los Angeles would have been vaporized. And they were waiting for the Soviet sub sitting off the coast of between Florida and Cuba, waiting for that sub to fire its missiles. That was how close the world came to a nuclear holocaust. And one person also told me, Dick Morris told me this, who was Bill Clinton's advisor. Dick Morris told me that one of the reasons that never happened was that Nikita Khrushchev had lied to the Supreme Soviet. He told his own Supreme Soviet that the Russians, that the Soviet Union, had intercontinental ballistic missiles. They didn't. They only had intermediate range ballistic missiles. And that's why Khrushchev blinked.
Gee, amazing, huh? Back to Tesla. Now, was it Hungarian?
He was Serbian.
Serbian, okay. So he moved here at a young age, no money in his pocket, really.
Penniless.
But he also came here with a letter from someone.
In It was
in
a
Serbia.
letter. It was a letter of introduction from his professor,
Yeah.
introducing him to Thomas Edison and asking Thomas Edison to take this young man on as an apprentice because he was a genius and could help Edison in anything he wanted to do.
And so, so Tesla had a task when he first got there, which he completed. And actually, if I remember right, he had something he was doing, and then he was supposed to get a payment for it. And he went to Edison for the payment, and Edison kind of laughed it off. Right?
Sure, because the power generators at the Pearl Street plant were failing. And so Edison said to Tesla, if you can fix these generators over the weekend, I will sign a check, give you a check, and you just fill in the zeros. And Tesla, oh, Mr. Edison, Maestro Edison, thank you. He does the work. He doesn't sleep for 48 hours. And then on Monday morning, Edison shows up and he goes, oh, Mr. Edison, I've done it. Oh, Master Edison, I fixed the generators. Can I have my check now? And Edison says to him, you thought that I was serious?
Poor guy. I mean, his whole life. There's Marconi. Now there was a rivalry between the two as well.
Oh my God, the rivalry lasted. The rivalry lasted until Edison died in 1932. One of the biggest explosions between them came in the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Chicago,
Right.
The city of light.
Yes. Yep.
Edison's General Electric put in a bid for a phenomenal amount of money, over $1 million, to light the fair. And the Chicago World's Fair management team said, we can't afford this. Who has the money for this?
Mm-hmm.
So Edison, thinking I'm really smart, cuts the bid in half. He says, nobody's going to be able to match this. Tesla, with Westinghouse, comes in $100,000 less, he gets the bid.
Yeah. And Edison has such a grudge, he doesn't even let him use his light bulbs, right?
That's true, because here's what happens. Tesla lights the fair with alternating current.
Yeah.
He doesn't need Edison's light bulbs.
What was the dream he had as a young boy before he ever came to America, that he wanted to do something with Niagara Falls, right? He wanted to build a generator.
He actually
Which he did.
He did.
Yeah.
His dream was to use the power of Niagara Falls and make that turn a generator, and that generator would power the entire Northeast grid. And that's exactly what he did. He used the power of Niagara Falls. He was one of the earliest inventors to develop hydroelectric power.
How long did that service run for there?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's no longer running,
Right,
obviously.
yeah.
But in fact, we could go off on a tangent about the 1965 power blackout. But it only ran for about, I want to say, maybe 35, 40 years.
It's still, and that's a lot of free power, like the Hoover Dam. You look at it that way. I mean, the Hoover Dam was such a massive undertaking. Niagara Falls was not, but you would never be able to do something like that in a natural situation today.
Not
in
not
a type
anymore.
of park or anything like that.
No, I mean, and this is where you're seeing. Well, this is where we are now as a country. I mean, to do that kind of work now, how much environmental impact would that have? How
Yeah.
much disturbance would that have? So people will scream, oh, you're killing the fish. But on the one hand, you're saying, yeah, we're killing the fish, but look at all the free power. On the other hand, people are saying, but how much of the environment are you going to destroy? This is exactly today. This is what's facing us right now. Because when you look at some of the environmental impacts that are coming out of the administration, from the Energy Department, from the Environmental Protection Department, when you're looking at that, you're seeing the same arguments today that you would have seen 100 years ago.
That is something. Let's talk about more of the friction between Tesla and Edison as time went on. Now, I mentioned Marconi. Didn't actually, without Tesla, the radio would have taken a lot longer to invent, right?
this is another bone of contention. Yes, it was Marconi who first began to develop wireless transmissions. Yes, that's true. At the same time, Tesla was developing wireless transmission of radio waves. What is a radio wave? It's electrons, right? I mean, and Edison was working on the transmission of electrons because he improved Bell's telephone. Remember, Bell's telephone didn't have a carbon transmitter in it. That's what phones have. Well, not our phones, not digital phones, but the basic analog phones have this thing. If you unscrew the mouthpiece, inside there is this carbon diaphragm, and that is a transmitter. And what that does is it translates the sound waves to electric waves, to electrons. Graham's telephone didn't have that. So Graham would have to shout into the phone, "Come here, Watson, I want you." And that was the phone that was at the White House that so impressed the president. What Edison did was he realized that a carbon diaphragm would transmit an electric current, and that improved the telephone. Tesla believed that you could do electronic transmission of electrons, and he believed in wireless transmission. So both he and Marconi, at the same time, were developing wireless transmission of electronics, sound waves. Marconi got the patent from the United States Patent Office. Now we're coming up on World War II. And Marconi, who was a fascist, I mean, he was working for Mussolini. Marconi asserts that the United States cannot use radios because that would infringe upon his patent, and they owed him licensing fees, and he refused to give them the license to use it. The United States challenges the patent and says that you don't have the patent. The United States Supreme Court, now what's funny is Marconi is basically on the side of Edison, because it's Edison who's licensing those patents. Because remember, it was the Marconi radio system that was used with Edison and with a person who was working for Marconi, Robert Sarnoff, to wire the early motion picture studios.
Oh, okay.
And the financier behind all of that was, wait for it, Papa Joe Kennedy, Joseph Kennedy.
Wow.
And that's why RKO became one of the first studios to become wired for sound. That's how talkies began. And that was all through Marconi. So the United States challenges Marconi's patent. The Supreme Court pulls the patent away from Marconi. The United States gets to use radios in World War II without paying a license fee. And so the common myth is that Tesla defeated Marconi for the patent. Not true. Tesla was not a part of that case.
You know, for some reason I was thinking radios were a lot earlier than World War II. Okay.
They were, but everybody was paying Marconi licensing fees.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I got it. So getting back to Edison, he lets, I think Tesla basically walks away, right?
Yes.
At one point. He walks away. Did he walk away with a plan, or did he just, I know he met up with Westinghouse. How did all that happen?
He goes to George Westinghouse, and he says to George Westinghouse, if you invest in my alternating current, not only will we defeat General Electric, but we will make more money because it's cheaper to build, cheaper to install, and here's the key. You could not install direct current across the North American continent because you couldn't put that many relay stations across the country. What Tesla argued to Westinghouse was that the power behind alternating current is so great that you're not going to need relay stations strung right across the North American continent. We can distribute that power by cable. Now, Edison said, and here's another great story. Edison said, no, that's not going to work because alternating current, the voltage is so high that somebody touches you put it into a house, somebody goes to plug something in, there's a short circuit, you're going to have thousands of volts going through a human body, the person will be electrocuted. So what does Tesla do? He invents the transformer to step current down. So you go through where I live right now in eastern Pennsylvania, you see these major power lines going across the Delaware River, up and down, up north and south across the state, and you can't even go near these power lines. You can't build near them, you can't put a house near them, because the power is so intense, and the static electricity is dangerous.
Yeah.
But if you look on the power poles, as the power goes into and is distributed to the housing developments, you see these transformers on the poles. Those transformers step the power down to 120 volts. That's what Tesla invented. In other words, Tesla made alternating current safe for household use. Edison would have none of that. What Edison said is, I'm going to prove that alternating current is deadly. So here's what he does. He goes to New York State, and he says to New York State, who do you have on death row that you're going to knock off? And New York says, oh, there's this prisoner, this murderer, Richard Kamler. He's a vicious man. Tesla said, Edison says, I'm going to find a way to execute this man for free. So he hires an engineer to build a chair, and he electrifies the chair with unstepped down alternating current. But first he has to test it. So he's testing it. He's killing dogs. He's killing cats. He's killing elephants. He's killing anything that comes in. It's terrible. That's what he's doing. Then they put Kamler in the chair. Now, this is a scene from the Green Mile, right?
Yeah.
They put him in the chair, they strap him in, they throw the power switches, and what happens? Kamler begins to smoke, begins to melt, his eyes start to run, but he doesn't die.
Did you do it like 3 times?
Yes! They do it again! Then they do it again!
God.
Finally he has a heart attack and dies. So what do the New York papers say? Incredible. And George Westinghouse was furious. He's saying, you can't do this. He's complaining to the governor. This is inhumane. This is like barbaric torture.
Mm-hmm.
The New York papers say that Richard Kamler was Westinghoused.
Oh, no. Oh, my God.
And that was the first example of unbranding of alternating current.
Oh, my God. Wow. And so as he worked with Westinghouse, I remember there was a contract that Tesla had with Westinghouse, and it had to do with horsepower. So many dollars per every horsepower motor that he built, which would have been probably $1 trillion today, but, millions of dollars. Now, Westinghouse went through some type of bad financial time, and Tesla forgave that contract. Is that right?
The Great Depression.
The Depression, of course.
The crash of the stock market. Tesla was on the verge of being a multi-billionaire. But he was he was a bitter man. I can tell you stories about Tesla that would basically your eyes will cross. He was a bitter man, but on the other hand, he was forgiving to the people whom he believed supported him. So he forgave that fee that he was owed from that horsepower fee that he was owed from Westinghouse. And in the end, same thing with J.P. Morgan. Tesla goes to J.P. Morgan and he says, I've got the greatest invention. I can transmit power wirelessly. That's happening right now. You can charge your iPhones now with the certain iPhones will charge wirelessly.
I used to say as a joke when I was a kid I was going to invent the wireless extension cord as a joke. But before I even heard of Tesla.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that was Tesla's plan. Wireless distribution of electricity, which we are going to have.
But he was envisioning it coming from the sky.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
Coming from these giant antennas, beaming power to municipal distribution grids.
Yeah.
Free.
Right.
And J.P. Morgan says to Tesla, why would I invest in something that I can't charge for?
Yeah, he was pretty shrewd.
Mhm.
So he goes to Colorado, builds this tower.
Right.
And
Colorado Springs.
At one point, doesn't he say that is it there that he thinks he hears an alien signal?
Right.
Yeah.
Tesla's view is that there are all these hidden frequencies, and all we had to do was find the right frequency, and you'd hear voices not only of aliens, but voices of the dead.
Really?
That was his
Jeez.
theory. Now, here's the plausibility of that theory. You and I are talking, and our voices, the radio waves, the sound waves from our conversation are going out into space. They're in a certain frequency. So let's say there's an alien race out beyond Pluto. If they had the right kind of equipment, in theory, Tesla argued, they'd be able to pick up the frequency of our conversation, so our voices would never die. Then Tesla said, take that to the next stage. What if it's 150 years in the future, but our conversations, just like the Tesla motor car with the mannequin that's now going out into the out of the solar system?
Yeah,
which
I
Elon Musk
was
is
going to
sending?
talk about
right.
that, yeah.
Well, just like that, 1,000,000 years from now, if that's not destroyed by radiation or not picked up by an alien, that's still going to be out there out beyond the solar system. Well, so will the sound of our voices. If you have the right frequency, long after we're gone. So Tesla is saying, if I could find the right frequency, I will hear the voices of the dead. And that was Tesla's plan for the spirit phone.
Isn't that amazing? It's almost like when you're looking through a telescope, you're looking back in time. You know? You're seeing
Exactly,
the
and
light
that
back
was
in time.
proven correct. We look back in time, we can look at very close to the beginning of the universe, only about a billion years.
Yeah.
I mean, and the gravitational waves, we've picked them up just 2 years ago. That's what's so fascinating. So Tesla was actually proven correct in that theory when those waves altered space-time from the collapse, actually not the collapse, but the collision of two massive black holes 1.3 billion years ago.
Yeah.
Now, Edison's view, Edison also had a view. He said his last invention, it's 1920, America and Europe are stunned by the deaths in World War I. Remember, World War I, it's been said a lot, and I'll say it again, it's trite now, was a 19th century war fought with 20th century weapons. Air power, massive artillery, poison gas, automatic weapons. So you can't just have a Napoleon Bonaparte army marching on Waterloo when you have automatic weapons firing into the line of soldiers. We found that in the Civil War, right? When Richard Jordan Gatling invented the Gatling gun, toward the end of the war, we were using that in the Indian Wars, in the American West. So this was a weapon for that time, a weapon of mass destruction. So that mass death created such a level of bereavement. We had the lost generation in Europe with Ernest Hemingway and Picasso. And Edison thought, what if? Now, Edison's theory was that everything is alive. It was a Gaian, it's what we'd call it today, it's the theory of Gaia. Rocks are alive, soil is alive, materials are alive, the wood in this table is alive, this is alive. It's all alive.
Well, in a way, and it's sort of in a way it is.
Exactly.
The molecules.
So therefore, Edison said, if there are life units, can life units be independent of their physicality? In other words, are life units, can they be transmitted? Can they be free-floating? Is there a medium through which they travel? And he said, if I could figure out a way to get a signal from those life units, I could talk to the dead. And so here's what he did. Here was his invention. Tesla's theory was radio waves. Edison's theory was photons, light waves. Edison said, now, at this point, he had already invented the motion picture projector to a large screen. I mean, motion picture projection had already been invented by then. He didn't invent motion pictures. But what he thought he could do is if he, instead of blowing up through lenses the image on film, he invented the sprocket camera though, but if he could blow up on a large screen, then you could have an audience see motion pictures, as opposed to the Nickelodeon where you had to look inside. Do it on a large screen. You could have multiple people seeing the same in a theater. What if I made the light beam, the photon beam, pencil thin? Okay, now it's a pencil thin photon beam. Where am I focusing that beam? Well, I'm going to focus it on a light meter. So when the beam hits the meter is being registered with that a light beam is hitting it. If something gets in the way of that beam, the meter is going to fluctuate. If that meter, if that cell, if that a photoelectric cell, that's what it is wired to a meter and the dial on the meter flips, I'll know if something is interrupting the beam before it hits the photoelectric cell. That'll tell me, even though I can't see anything, that something is crossing that beam. And that was the spirit phone.
Wow. Which ended up being something to open doors and all kinds of things, right?
Yes. Talk about the strange ways that we invent things for one purpose and turn out being for another purpose.
Yeah. Really something. I was going to, and I will ask you now, I wonder if Tesla would have ever envisioned, first of all, a car would be named after him by Elon Musk, but actually would be floating, throughout the galaxy, possibly, forever and ever. I mean, what a
Of course, cars had already been invented by the time Tesla was inventing. I mean, cars were combustion engines were combustion. In fact, combustion engines were being used to power lighter than aircraft in the 1890s.
Right.
The Great Texas Airship Mystery of 1897 in Aurora, Texas, that was a lighter than aircraft powered by a combustion engine that hit the paddle wheels, the windmills of a well pump, exploded the gasoline engine, and it wasn't a UFO. It was a UFO to them, but it wasn't a UFO to us.
Now did that actually get solved in your show?
In UFO Hunters, we solved that because what happened was...
Well, there's the unknown grave, right?
The unknown grave, but the graveyard manager wouldn't let us dig it up, so we took ground penetrating radar and ran it over the grave, and sure enough, there were bones.
Really? Yeah. So why did they think it was just alien to them? They didn't understand it?
They didn't know what it was, because what happened was these airships, these were sportsmen in the American Southwest, right here. And what they were doing is they would decorate. First of all, they would clad their airships with metals. They were metallically clad airships. And they were in the shapes of birds. So people would see these metallic birds flying through the air with a combustion engine. They didn't know what a combustion engine was, powered like that. And in fact, in the 1890s, they were trying to get these airships over to Cuba to fight Spain in the Spanish-American War.
Now, what did they use in the, I want to say, balloon part or the dirigible part of it for gas, the lighter than air gas? What did they actually use? It wasn't
hydrogen.
That's what I was going to ask, which is highly explosive. Yes. Yeah, very deadly. And they used that in the Civil War, too.
That's right, and that's why the balloon blew up. That's why the whole thing blew up when it hit, when it hit the power, when it hit the mill, The paddles ruptured the hydrogen, created a spark, the thing ignites, the engine blows up, aluminum goes all over the place into the well, which, by the way, was being closed up because Judge Proctor had such bad arthritis. I could go on.
One thing after another. Now, you just said the word aluminum. Now, wasn't aluminum like a real precious metal at that time?
Yes. And when we found the aluminum fragments in the well that people said didn't exist, that was the great part about UFO Hunters. The great part about that show, what I loved the most about that show, was debunking the debunkers.
I remember that, yeah.
And so when Pat Uskert, and boy, we put him into the greatest diving costume, dropped him in the well. He comes up with these aluminum pieces. We took him to one of the Texas University metallurgy labs and tested him. They said, yeah, it's aluminum all right, but wow, this is aluminum from the early 20th century.
And that was a big deal then.
Yeah, because they changed the alloy after World War II.
Yeah, yeah. Now, we only have about five or maybe 7 minutes left. So what can you tell us, since you did this research? As you can tell, I'm more interested in Tesla than I am in Edison. But what can you tell us about Tesla the man? I know he never married. He actually, I think women, he was repulsed by women and their perfume and things like that. He was very, he had these neurosis.
He was very sensitive to all kinds of sensory input.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't like loud noises.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't like intense fragrances, aromas.
Yeah.
He didn't like intense taste. But here's the funny story about him. Toward the end of his life, he was living in the New Yorker hotel.
Right. That's where he
single room hotel. Penniless man.
Yeah.
And so the Serbo-Croatian boxing championship is paying a visit. He's going to have the big heavyweight fight in New York, Madison Square Garden. Mm. And so they say to Tesla, oh, you have to meet him, Master Tesla. You have to meet him, Maestro. You have to give him your blessing for this fight. So they meet Tesla. They go to a restaurant. And this is a fighter. He's a strapping man. He's in training. So he's eating light. And Tesla says, how can you fight in the championship without wine and steak? And they say, oh, no, Master Tesla. He can't do that. Steak will wear him down. He'll be too sluggish to fight. Tesla goes, nonsense! The biggest steak, give it to him. He eats the steak. He's walking in the ring like he's in a daze. Flattened.
Oh, my God. Oh, that's something. And I know that he befriended birds. You know, I mean, he fed birds.
He would feed the birds.
But did he have friends? Did he have any friends?
No, but here's
kind
what
of
he
a loner.
did. He was a loner, and he would stack up all of his files of his sketches and inventions and his plans for patents. And before the war, he wrote to the United States government and said, I have a plan for an anti-gravity machine. I can develop anti-gravity. And the United States said, oh, no, you're just a wacky old man. You're just crazy. We're not going to spend money on this. So what did he do? He wrote to Stalin.
Oh, my goodness.
And he
he also had the death ray or something,
too. That was the particle beam.
Okay,
in fact, that was well before, that was all the way back in the 1930s. In fact, Tesla became the poster boy for the evil genius. And if you go back and can find on YouTube or some of the old Flash Gordon serials, the death ray, because Tesla said if he had a very concentrated, he invented particle beam weapons. And he said that I can have a death ray that's so powerful that it'll penetrate anything and destroy anything. Well, it was never invented back in the 30s, but it did see the light of day back in the 1930s. In one form. Flash Gordon, in the Flash Gordon serials, Ming the Merciless, Emperor of the planet Mongo, focused his death ray on planet Earth. And Flash Gordon had to fly to Mongo and destroy the death ray. And so Tesla's death ray did see the light of day in motion pictures.
Isn't that funny? Now, one last thing I want to talk about, and going back to the tower in Colorado, that idea, he was, right to the day he died, he, as far as I know, he truly thought that there could be a source of wireless power, free power. How close did he get to that?
Very close. He came so close that he couldn't get the financing to facilitate it because J.P. Morgan said, I'm not going to pay for it. But yes, he believed it. And in fact, he had two forms of wireless power. And in fact, this even gets better because the forms of wireless, just one of those forms of wireless power is now being used in Australia by guess whom? Oh. Elon Musk and Tesla.
In Australia?
In Australia, here was his theory. If every house could have powerful solar converters to take sunlight, convert the sunlight into steam, the steam would generate hydroelectric power. Each house would have its own power station. That was his theory. And that's exactly what Elon Musk is doing with his solar panels. Now, it's not generating steam. It's going direct from solar power to storage batteries to energy. It's bypassing the steam. Mm-hmm. But what's so funny is that was the basis of Tesla's invention.
Isn't that something? And the part about getting, I know there's something like, and I looked this up one time because sometimes I can be kind of a geek on things, but I forget how many lightning strikes there are per day in the world, but it's in the millions. It's like 2 million or something. Do you think at any time in the future we'd ever be able to harness that power in any type of way? I mean, that's out of the box thinking, but that's what he was basically thinking. Yes. Which is intermittent and hard to judge where it's going to happen.
It is, but let's just say that you had the ability to generate the kind of electric charge, right, that the pole differential that would send ground lightning up and cloud lightning down. If you could do that, but focus that in one spot, store that power in massive storage batteries that will not degrade the power, store it, and then transmit that power, you would have free power from the heavens.
Yeah. Well, Bill, as always, it's always a pleasure talking to you, and it's so great to meet you finally.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I get your emails all the time. It's wonderful. I hear your show, so finally we get to do this in person.
Yes. And do you have a website or anything?
Folks can go to shadowlawnpress.com, which is my website, look at all of our books, buy all of our books. They're all available. And but I wanted to leave with this because I know that you're going to be talking to Bryce Zabel.
Yes, right.
And in a book that came out Tuesday called UFOs in the White House, I'll just tease this, it is the story of why Mark David Chapman killed John Lennon.
Really?
Yes. All right. It has nothing to do with UFOs. even though part of the myth was that because John Lennon had communicated with aliens and they gave him the alien egg to translate their language, which really was John Dee from Elizabethan England, to translate their language, that's why he was killed. It was something far more mundane, but far creepier.
Wow. Amazing. All right, Bill, thanks again.
It was my pleasure.
All right, that's it for the show. Thanks so much for listening. And we'll be back next week with two guests on at the same time, Derek Gilbert and Josh Peck. They've written a couple books. One is, the most recent one is called The Earth Stands Still, Old Gods Behind ETs and UFOs. It's going to be a great show. I just have a gut feeling about that. So we'll be back at the regular time. And if you support the show, thanks so much. Remember, anyone can do that. Just go to podcastufo.com. And that's it for this week. Thank you for listening. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.